In 2005, when Modi was the chief minister of Gujarat, the United States State Department suspended Modi's US visa after finding him complicit in the 2002 Gujarat riots. Over 1,000 people were killed, 3/4 of them were Muslim. Modi later banned a BBC documentary that highlighted his complicity in the riots. And we are told we must now turn a blind eye to the repression because of foreign policy concerns, even though human rights are supposed to be at the center of our foreign policy. But Prime Minister Modi is not even a reliable geopolitical ally. Modi has maintained a close economic ties with Putin even after his illegal invasion of Ukraine and continues to rely on Russia for oil and weapons. We are holding today's briefings to hear the facts, not spin. And I'm incredibly grateful to our panelists in delivering some of those facts. But first, I want to invite Representative McGovern to give a few remarks.
First of all, let me thank Congresswoman Omar for organizing this today. I want to thank the panelists, but especially her because she is a consistent champion for human rights, and sometimes being a champion for human rights can be uncomfortable. And she does it nonetheless, and I have great admiration for her. Look, all of us here today recognize that India is an important country with a rich history and a diverse society and an important ally of the United States. We celebrate the Indians who migrated here and made the United States their home and contributed to the diversity and the richness of American society. These realities are not in question. It's because we value our friendship with the Indian people that we also have to speak the truth about human rights abuses in India that are ongoing, well documented by credible observers, and deeply troubling. We hear regularly from representatives of ethnic and religious minorities in India who believe deeply in India's secular constitution, but fear that their rights are being systematically undermined. I'm talking about the Muslim population, which is 200 million strong, but also about Sikhs, Christians, and Dalits who've come to me to talk to me about their fears. We've also seen a crackdown on freedom of expression and freedom of the press, charges of defamation, sedition, and endangering national security have escalated to such an extent that it looks like the government is trying to silence critical voices. Civil society organizations have faced threats, legal harassment, excessive police force, even deadly violence. Some foreign NGOs, including Amnesty International, have been forced to close down their operations. In 2019, as co-chair of the Tamil Nadu Human Rights Commission, I convened a hearing on human rights in Jammu and Kashmir. We heard about a litany of problems that were only made worse by the decision to strip away autonomy. The situation has only grown worse since. And we don't raise these issues to discredit India. We raise them because we know from our own experience that if human rights problems are not confronted and resolved, they will fester and deepen and undermine a country's promise. So we call on the Indian authorities to take steps to reverse these well-documented and unfortunate trends and restore the full promise of the Indian Constitution. And by the way, we're working to do the same here in the United States. We're not perfect, and we have issues that we have to deal with here as well. But I am grateful for this opportunity to listen to experts on their analysis of what the situation is and some suggestions of things that we might want to do here in Congress. So I thank my colleague, Congresswoman Omar, and look forward to hearing the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. I want to start with Sarah Yagar. Sarah is the Washington Director of Human Rights Watch. She previously worked at the Department of Defense and at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Sarah, maybe you can set the scene for our discussion. What is the human rights situation in India now, and what has U.S. policy been?
Thank you, Congresswoman Omar, and really important right now, and particularly given what we are seeing from US officials, to come here and together highlight the democratic backsliding and the human rights abuses that we are seeing in India. Of course, at Human Rights Watch, our job is to spotlight human rights abuses around the world. We do that in India, and we do it here in the United States. And of course, this is the partnership that US and Indian officials are talking about this week. So I wanted to just highlight some of the ways in which India is backsliding on human rights. In our World Report, which came out in February 2023, we highlighted major rights concerns in both India and the United States. Both countries need to do more to address systemic racism, racial or caste-based supremacy, xenophobia, economic inequality, and other entrenched barriers to systemic change. We've seen that several states in the United States have recently tightened restrictions on voting rights, peaceful protests, and access to reproductive health, censored educational materials, and journalism. These are things that we share in common with the Indian government at this moment. In India, respect for civil and political rights has markedly deteriorated under Prime Minister Modi's government, especially for groups facing persecution due to their caste, religion, ethnicity, political belief. And for civil society advocates, journalists, and human rights defenders, including some of my own colleagues, who are critical of the government, they live threatened. We think that Prime Minister Modi could be taking a lot more action, including to stem some of the hate speech that is coming from his colleagues. And we believe that President Biden should be talking with Prime Minister Modi about these very issues. We don't know if that has happened. I presume we will get a readout that mentions human rights. But there is a lot of messaging that President Biden could be giving to Prime Minister Modi that in fact is not critical, but actually supportive of an empowered democracy in India. While our job is to highlight human rights abuses, we are also realistic. We live in the real world. We know that the United States has many interests in India, and India has many interests in the United States that are pragmatic. We think that human rights actually is a pragmatic interest for both countries. In order to confront new global challenges together, they need to maintain social unity in both places, stop festering resentments in both places, to manage climate change, food insecurity, new threats to sovereignty. The security issues require promoting human rights, and they have to learn to be more tolerant of constructive and peaceful dissent. India, we think, has an opportunity to show global leadership that does not look like China's. And it is actually at this moment that Prime Minister Modi has an opportunity to course correct. Otherwise, we will see India following the path of an authoritarian China with rampant human rights abuses. We don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that India will follow this path. And so we are looking to the United States and to the Biden administration to help India realize its potential on the global stage. And I won't mention China because as a factor in what the United States' interests are in India, because I think that's probably been mentioned by US policymakers a bit too much this week. Rather, India has its own place on the world stage, and the only way to realize that in any positive way is to promote human rights and stop the abuses that are currently happening. And with that, I will turn it back. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we will go to Stephen Schnick, who is a commissioner at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. The commission has, for 4 consecutive years, recommended that India be listed as a country of particular concern by the State Department. Today, I reintroduced my resolution echoing the Commission's call. Mr. Schnick, I understand you have a statement prepared on behalf of the Commission discussing India's recent record on religious freedom. We would like to invite you to read that statement.
I do. Thank you, Congresswoman Omar. As you heard, I'm a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USERF as we call it, and it's an honor to be here this evening in such distinguished company. I'm very grateful to Representative Omar and her staff for organizing this incredibly important event, and I'm very grateful as well to hear from Representative McGovern today. USERF is an independent, bipartisan governmental commission that monitors the universal right to freedom of religion or belief abroad. USERF seeks to defend religious freedom internationally for people of all faiths and people of no faith. We are mandated to make policy recommendations to the President, the Department of State, and Congress to protect and promote the universal right to believe freely and to practice beliefs freely. We do so not based on American values or U.S. foreign policy, but according to international law and UN declarations. These are challenging times for the rights of belief. USERF's 2023 annual report tracks rising anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Hindu hatred, anti-Christian hatred, and dozens of other abridgments of freedom of religion or belief around the world. Prime Minister Modi's state visit presents a unique opportunity to the Biden administration and to members of Congress to better incorporate religious freedom issues and other human rights concerns in India into the two countries' bilateral relationship. Since 2020, USERF has recommended that the State Department designate the Republic of India as a country of particular concern, or CPC, and thank you, Congresswoman, for introducing the legislation. That is for its systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. We made the same recommendation again last month in our 2023 annual report. Our reports detail over the last several years that the Indian government at the national, state, and local levels has promoted and enforced laws and policies that undermine the religious freedom of its citizens. These include restrictions on religious conversion, religious dress, interfaith marriage, and cow slaughter that negatively impact Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, and indigenous and scheduled tribal peoples. The national government there also continues to suppress critical voices, particularly religious minorities, and those advocating on their behalf, through surveillance, harassment, demolition of property, and detention under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Across India, religious minorities face targeted violence and discrimination. Just last week, reports highlight alarming instances of violence against largely Christian tribal groups in Manipur. Since May, as many as 50,000 people have been displaced there, and nearly 100 lives have been lost during the ongoing conflict between the state's Hindu Meitei community and the predominantly Christian Kuki population. Waves of violence there have targeted religious symbols and places of worship, including churches and synagogues. In total, more than 250 churches of different denominations, as well as 2 Jewish synagogues, have been burned or damaged across Manipur in recent weeks. Similarly, in Chhattisgarh, targeted attacks on Christians earlier this year also serve as a stark reminder about how vitriol can turn violent, resulting in the destruction of places of worship and displacement. In these and other instances, the quick spread of disinformation and hate speech on social media has stoked mob vigilantism and other types of communal violence. India's state-level anti-conversion laws also enable and encourage extremists among Hindu nationalists to target and discriminate against religious minorities under the guise of protecting the Hindu faith and upholding state laws. The application and advocacy of these policies by government officials has created a culture of impunity for nationwide campaigns of harassment and violence, particularly toward Muslims and Christians. USERF's reporting indicates that authorities, including police, including police, at times assist Hindu nationalist vigilante groups in these activities. 12 Indian states have legislation prohibiting religious conversion based on force, allurement, inducement, or fraud. However, these laws contain such broad definitions that they can be interpreted as prohibiting any kind of conversion, whether consensual or not. Anti-conversion laws increasingly target interfaith marriages, for example, and interfaith couples. Under the Special Marriage Act, interfaith marriages require a 30-day notice period, essentially allowing the opportunity for individuals to object to marriage. In practice, though, anti-conversion laws targeting interfaith marriage restrain an individual's constitutional right to convert and curtail the right to choose one's marriage partner. These laws carry penalties of hefty fines and imprisonment. At the national level, the pilot implementation of the proposed National Register of Citizens, the NRC, in the state of Assam continues to exacerbate fears of losing citizenship among the Muslim population, which lacks protection under the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA. That act provides a pathway to citizenships for non-Muslims from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, in conjunction with the government's proposed NRC requiring residents to provide proof of citizenship. USCIRF is concerned, however, that that very act could also subject Indian Muslims and others not covered to statelessness, deportation, and prolonged detention. Moreover, although argued by its proponents as intended to help persecuted religious minorities, the law does not include other vulnerable religious communities, such as the Rohingya Muslims, the Ahmadiyya Muslims, the Hazara Shia Muslims, or the Baha'is in neighboring countries. As I mentioned previously, USCIRF is also tracking accounts of discrimination of Sikhs, Jains, Dalits, and indigenous tribal populations. These are just some, really just some of the examples that highlight the particularly severe religious freedom violations taking place in India today. During Prime Minister Modi's visit, we asked that members of Congress raise these issues directly, and we urge the United States government to remain engaged with India to address some of the discriminatory policies that I've just noted. And let me close on a personal note. Before my appointment to this commission by President Biden, I was a professor of political philosophy. In that former capacity, let me observe that the rights of conscience and belief are foundational for every other human right. Any erosion of freedom of religion or belief is an erosion of all rights. We cannot be silent. We cannot be complacent. We cannot overlook the importance of these rights amidst the many other pressing issues of foreign policy and international relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I want to go to next Sunita Vishwanath, the Executive Director of Hindus for Human Rights. Sunita is a longtime feminist and activist working on human rights issues in South and Central Asia. Sunita, you co-founded Hindus for Human Rights in 2019. You all have focused both on the situation in India and advocated for human rights here in the United States. How do you see the two struggles linked?
So, first of all, thank you for just being a ray of hope. There's often not that ray of hope, and you represent that for us. So speak up bravely, and there's always a platform for our issues and our concerns and our pain, thanks to you. So thank you. Thank you so much. And not just India, it's so many countries around the world where you lift up the oppressed. So yes, Hindus for Human Rights, we co-founded it in 2019 after Narendra Modi was elected the second time with an even larger mandate than the first time. And his record through the first 5 years was so scary, with the number of lynchings of often young Muslim boys, but Muslim people and Dalit women, the rapes and lynchings, and then the arrests of dissenters and human rights defenders, just the track record over those first 5 years was appalling enough that when he was elected for the second time, we decided, a few of us, that it was high time for a platform for progressive, inclusive, democratic-minded, anti-caste Hindus to fight back. And we created Hindus for Human Rights. We feel that since the majority population in India is Hindu, diverse in terms of, every kind of diversity you would think about, class, caste, income level. Nevertheless, they go by the label Hindu, and that's the population that the Modi government, which is a Hindu nationalist government, is mobilizing for its hateful mission. So we, as Hindus, feel that, number one, this ideology, Hindu nationalism, Hindutva, Narendra Modi, BJP, does not represent all of us by any means. And experts on the electoral system in India tell me that actually, numerically, probably most Hindus don't even, like in terms of numbers, don't even support the BJP. So what we feel is that the first order of business is to go into the Hindu community and bring up these issues, bring up these truths that have just been laid out. They're facts. They're facts that can be proven. Just bring up these issues, the facts, the data of the deterioration of democracy and the catastrophe of human rights, and have hope that some percentage of the Hindu community, when they see those facts, will be moved. If we don't have hope in human beings, then perhaps, there's nothing for us to do. We are all here because we have that hope in each other. So that's what Hindus for Human Rights is. Our mission is. It's to fight the misinformation, the lies of the Hindu right, and on a Hindu platform, lifting up. Every religion has beautiful teachings, including mine. So we lift up those beautiful teachings of oneness, justice, peace, ahimsa, the fact that God is in every one of us. Those are beautiful teachings that lend themselves directly to the pursuit of human rights. And so if this mischief, this sinister mischief is being done in the name of Hinduism, we need to be in that conversation so that we can lift up the best of Hinduism and hope that many Hindus join us. There's 3 lies. Lies are good. When your opponent is telling lies, it's a gift to you, actually. So, because you can then expose that and hope that good, rational, smart people will see that they're being fooled. So one is that Narendra Modi and the BJP claim to actually be democratic. So that's easy to disprove. If you have a willing audience that's going to take you, you have to communicate in a way that you're not going to be alienated and dismissed because you're speaking in a way that you're presenting yourself as an enemy. If you can speak in a way that it's often family that you're talking to, because we're talking about Hindus talking to Hindus. But if you can make it so that you're being listened to and present these facts, that itself exposes the lie that the BJP cares about democracy. Another opportunity for us is that our government, the Biden administration, claims to care about democracy. So if we care about democracy, then it follows that if we care about democracy, then we ought to care about the declining democracy in India. So we cannot produce a State Department report that's scathing and put it in a drawer and then have a red carpet welcome. That's hypocrisy, and that's a lie that we can lift up. And the third opportunity is that the claim of this ideology is that it's Hindu. And it is Hindu, actually. It's just an aberration of Hinduism. It's the worst. It's the most evil, twisted, violent, destructive form of Hinduism. But if we can, and this is something Hindus have to do, if we can show that the Hinduism of most of our parents and grandparents would have been a pluralistic one. We would all have been taught this aphorism, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is one sacred family, which is the same as Martin Luther King's beloved kingdom. If we can lift up those truths from our faith, if we can lift up the fact that, the male and the female are inseparable, and that God is both, and we do not accept an angry and warring Lord Rama that doesn't have his consort Sita by his side. If we can expose that actually our beautiful faith is being misused for harm, that is the third opportunity. And that's the work that we do. And I think it's not possible to turn this around without Hindus being woken up, mobilized. I think it's not going to do it all on its own. We need everybody, but it's not possible without Hindus in the mix. I would just end by saying to any elected officials and staffers listening, please do not let the Hindu right speak for all Hindus. Please go the extra leg. We don't have the capacity of the Hindu right, but please go that extra journey, the extra leg to say, where is the progressive Hindu voice here? I don't want to hear just one side. That would immediately transform all of our advocacy here today. Thank you so much.
Sunita, thank you. We are grateful for your advocacy because it's personal and it's important. So thank you. Before I introduce our next panelist, I wanted to invite Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib to come down and say a few words. I'm always the young, mischievous sibling here in our sibling relationship. Yes.
I got you.
Hi everyone, salams everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is an incredibly important discussion. It is hard in an institution like ours to continue to speak truth because so many people have been able to have access to this institution before many of our minority groups and many of our voices, especially those that continue to pursue justice, especially around human rights. I'm just incredibly proud to be serving with Ilhan Omar, who's always been courageous and always standing on the right side. So thank you so much for leading this discussion. And I want you to know, the first person to bring this discussion to me was actually Hindu in Michigan. He came to me, he's a professor, and he's like, Rashida, I know that you're Muslim, but I need your help. And I said, what can I do? I don't know if they're gonna listen to me. But this was about 3 years ago. And we created an amazing coalition of people of different backgrounds from India, not only from Kashmir, which always is centered around that issue, but it was Indian Christians, minorities, folks that are working in the media outlet and education. And it was an incredible, incredible discussion. By the time we were always ending our work group discussions about the resolution we worked on together, we were all in tears. We wish that people could see that side of us all coming together in this way. And you know, that's something that I want to continue to put seeds down for. You all are continuing doing that, again, by being here. As I walked here, it was hard because you can see they knew exactly who I was. They knew where my position was as I was walking through the halls as the speech was ending. But I kept my head up held high because that's what my grandmother taught me. And I was unapologetically not going to allow them to make me spar and pretend like, you know, I'm a proud justice seeker and a person that believes everyone deserves human rights. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for giving credibility to myself, Jim, and Ilhan. You know, when we go out there and speak up, much of what you bring to us are tools for us to organize and again to uplift those truths. So thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rashida. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Nadine Farid Johnson, the Washington Director of PEN America. PEN America has done tireless documentation and advocacy around freedom of expression in India. Last year, they published an essential series of reflections from Indian writers to mark the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Nadine, what are some of the major concerns you're seeing as it relates to the freedom of expression in India?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you to your staff for putting this together. Congressman Slave and Chairman McGovern, really pleased to hear from you as well, and appreciate your efforts. PEN America stands at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression and defend the liberties that make it possible in the U.S. and around the world. And what we've been seeing here is that Prime Minister Modi's government has employed a range of tactics to chill free expression in India, including the liberal use of investigative agencies and tax authorities against media outlets and publication houses that have been critical of the government, as well as the use of paid online networks to harass and slander journalists and other critics, including writers. Myriad threats to free expression have been building steadily in recent years under this government. In PEN America's most recent Freedom to Write Index, India is the only nominally democratic country to break the top 10. This has been happening for the past 4 years. This means that India is in the top 10 countries worldwide who jail writers and public intellectuals. All of those jailed have been held for months or even years in pre-trial detention in one or more cases filed against them. Authorities in India make use of such legal and administrative harassment techniques to silence critical voices and to chill speech. Key cases include that of Fahad Shah, a Kashmiri journalist, founding editor of the Kashmir Wallah, and contributor to foreign news outlets, who has been detained since February 2022. And the multiple writers jailed as part of the Bhima Koregaon case, which has targeted a range of leftist dissident voices. Indian American writers as well face possible visa denials and revocation of their overseas Indian citizenship cards if they speak out against the government. There is also an uptick in efforts to control the digital space in India, with the introduction of new IT rules giving authorities greater power to remove social media content. Access Now reports that for 5 years running, India has been the world's leader in internet shutdowns, 84 instances in the last year alone. Online campaigns of denigration and disinformation against journalists and government critics and the arrest of citizens for posts critical of the government are all part of this ongoing crackdown and suppression of free expression in the country. Investigations by the Pegasus Project found that Pegasus spyware was used by the Indian government on opposition leaders, journalists, activists, and minority leaders, Supreme Court judges, religious leaders, and others. The consortium confirmed Pegasus infections or signs of potential targeting were on phones linked to 10 Indian numbers and on an additional 27 phones around the world. The Indian government has cracked down on free expression and open inquiry in ways that actually mirror anti-democratic efforts to censor history and education here in the United States. This school year, the Indian government presented 6th to 12th grade students with heavily rewritten school textbooks that removed key details about Indian history, such as the centuries-long Muslim Mughal dynasty, India's founding as a secular republic, and the anti-Muslim riots in Gujarat that the Congressman mentioned, in which Modi took part as, or was the chief minister of the state during the time. And as we know, of course, the BBC documentary that discussed his role in those riots has been banned in the country and actually beyond. Modi's intent to silence facts that the government finds unpalatable bodes poorly for this democracy. So what can we do? This administration can and should uphold its commitment to democratic values in its engagement with the Modi administration. We ask the government's urge the Indian government to cease its misuse of official agencies to instigate spurious administrative or financial investigation against writers, journalists, and activists who are critical of the Indian government. We ask that they encourage the reform of laws that are used to restrict free expression and to reinforce the need for the Indian government to adhere to human rights and free expression principles as a foundational element of the U.S.-India bilateral relationship. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadine. Next, I would like to introduce Ajit Sethi, a veteran journalist and a human rights activist who also serves as the advocacy director for the Indian American Muslim Council. Ajit, the Indian American Council was formed in 2002 in response to the Gujarat riots. Of course, it was Modi who oversaw those riots. What connections do you see between 2002 and now?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for having us over here. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for being here. And thank you, Chairman McGovern. Thank you, Congresswoman Farid. 7 years ago, this month, Mr. Modi spoke to Congress, and just one day before that joint session of Congress that Mr. Modi spoke at, there was a hearing at the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, and it was called Challenges and Opportunities, Human Rights in India, Challenges and Opportunities. Chairman McGovern was there. I was one of the witnesses who testified. And since you spoke just now about Pegasus, I'm one of the people whose phone was hacked using Pegasus by the Indian government. So I think what was restricted to the state of Gujarat in 2002 is now all over India. India has 1.4 billion people. Last month, we became the world's most populated country, beating China. And therefore, China and India together have about 2.8 billion people, which is more than 1/3 of humanity. So 1 out of 3 people on the planet are either Chinese or Indian. And China is already a dictatorship, it is an autocracy, it's a one-party rule. India is quite getting there. What was restricted to Gujarat, what was an anomaly, is now a norm in India. That's what's happening. Out of the 1.4 billion people in India, 80% are Hindus. I am a Hindu myself. I work for a Muslim organization. I am a Hindu. And I can tell you, one of the biggest changes that I see now is that the poison of hatred among the Hindus has gone very deep. I speak to large audiences of Muslims across the United States, and I joke with them and I say, you think you guys are a minority? Think about me. Nobody in my extended family wants to talk to me. Right? This is where we are, and this is the most worrisome feature. You have this great, huge rivalry between the United States and China, but you do not find Asian Americans, the Chinese American people, who are just going crazy anytime anybody opens their mouth and speaks against Narendra Modi or the Indian persecution of Muslims in India. But the opposite is the case. As many of you politicians know, the opposite is the case. There are American politicians who are now scared of speaking out about Hindu fundamentalism inside the United States because it is so well organized. I just want to take you back to why this is happening. There was an American journalist by the name of William Shirer who had lived in Germany in the 1930s. He wrote several books on Hitler, on the Third Reich. And in one of his books, in the foreword he wrote, he said, the Western leaders were all very surprised when Hitler started doing what he was doing. If only they had read his book, his autobiography, he is actually merely implementing everything he had said in that autobiography. He had laid out the plans. You didn't want to read it. If you really look at what's going on in India, it has all been documented, it has been written, it has been put on paper by the RSS, which is the motherboard, the main organization of Hindu fundamentalism in India, an organization that inspired the assassin who killed Mahatma Gandhi. And this organization, founded in 1925, fully 14 years before the start of the Second World War, this organization for the last 98 years has had only one objective, and that is to convert India into a Hindu country with virtually no rights for its especially Christians and Muslims. They have written it month after month, year after year, decade after decade in all their communication. This organization has been banned 3 times in India. Mr. Modi became a member of this organization at the tender age of 16 or 17, and this organization is the organization that rejected the Constitution of India in 1950 when that Constitution was promulgated. We are at a point in history in India. This is not some random autocrat you are dealing with. You are dealing with a very organized movement that is 98 years old. The founders of this ideology, they wrote extensively in support of Hitler. one of the key founders, the guy who Mr. Modi has put his statue at a new parliament building, that guy wrote that Hitler has shown that races cannot live together, and Hitler has shown what purity of race means, right? That's who these people are. That is what they have followed over the decades. That's what they still believe in. And that is why we need to understand they are not just a threat to India, they're not just a threat to Muslims, they're not just a threat to Christians, they are a threat to world peace. If America is serious about its national security objectives, if America is serious about its geopolitics, if the President of the United States must be the statesman he's been elected to be, and not, unfortunately, look like a salesman for the defense contractors, then you have to take a stand, and you have to understand that you are jeopardizing peace, you are jeopardizing stability by supporting the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, by supporting his political movement, by supporting his ideology. This must stop. For the sake of America, it must stop. I'm going to conclude by just saying there has to be a ray of hope. And the ray of hope is that even though Hindus in India are 80%, Mr. Modi in the last election got only 36% of the national vote. That is very critical for people to understand. When people think, oh my God, he's loved by all the Hindus, oh my God, he's so popular. When President Biden says, oh my God, you're so popular, I need your autograph, please understand. 80%, India's population is 80%, Hindus are 80%, only 36% of the national vote is what he got. In the state of Karnataka in South India, where elections were held a month and a half ago, only 5% are Muslim, more than 90% are Hindus. They rejected the BJP, they threw them out, right? So there is hope, it is political, the change has to come from within India, but in America, we must not normalize this. I can only give you the example of Pakistan. Unfortunately, going back in history, it was the United States which actually normalized both fundamentalism and persecution in the country of Pakistan, and look where you are with the country of Pakistan. You can't even walk on the streets in Pakistan, right? It's in America's interest to ensure that India stays stable, India continues to have peace and progress, that social hostility does not exist in India. The state of Manipur that Commissioner Schneck referenced, that you spoke about, that I think Chairman McGovern also spoke about, it borders Myanmar. There's massive, it has got a porous border. How on earth does escalation of violence in the state of Manipur advance national security objectives is a question I asked a top official of the National Security Council when they invited me and a couple of others to speak with them last month. I said, can you explain to me, how does this violence advance your own national security objectives? Because Manipur borders Myanmar, which is a vassal state of China who you don't like anymore. So these are questions that America must understand. This cannot be. It will be a pity if America can only think about $3 billion in sales of drones, $34 billion in sales of aircraft, Boeing aircraft, and it's not going to happen, it's not going to work. I'm going to stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajit, for that very passionate remarks. Again, thanks to our panelists. We'll probably open up for some questions from the audience. But before we do that, I wanted to give a shout out to Ryan Morgan from my office, who does the foreign policy work on our behalf, and the rest of our team for orchestrating this incredible briefing and panel. With that, you guys okay with taking some questions? Oh, I forgot. I'm a complete person. See, this is what you did with your... I was like, it's a wrap. I'm sorry, Luqman. Okay, finally, we will hear from Luqman Fatahi, the U.S. Advocate Director of the Committee for Project Journalists. Luqman, we have seen a significant crackdown on free press in India over the last several years, including the famous example of the BBC documentary being banned. What concerns does CPJ have about the current situation for journalists in India? And again, my apologies.
emojis.
Thank you. Representative Omar, thank you very much for convening this panel, to have this important discussion about the state of human rights in India and how the United States should, handle the relationship with the Indian government. The Committee to Protect Journalists is an independent, nonprofit organization that promotes press freedom worldwide. We defend the rights of journalists to report the news safely and without fear of reprisal. We believe press freedom is a keystone for thriving democracies. In terms of how we see the situation in India, since Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, CPJ has documented a worsening government crackdown on the media in the country. Journalists critical of PM Modi's government and his political party, the BJP, have been jailed, harassed, and surveilled in retaliation for their journalism. 6 journalists, 4 of whom are from Indian-administered Kashmir, are currently detained in India in retaliation for their work. All have been targeted under draconian security laws. CPJ, in partnership with other allies in the press freedom field, published a full-page op-ed ad in the Washington Post yesterday, showing the information about those journalists who are in detention and kind of warning the government in the United States and others among the public of the dangers to press freedom in India, and highlighting the importance that press freedom and journalism plays in, for a human rights centered governance in India. In addition, at least as kind of previously indicated, at least 40 journalists appeared on a leaked list of potential targets for Pegasus spyware, even though the NSO group, the creator of Pegasus, has said that it only sells spyware to governments whose human rights records have been vetted for the purpose of countering terrorism and crime. And additionally, the numerous internet shutdowns, particularly in Kashmir and most recently in Punjab, undermine press freedom and access to timely and credible information by the public in India. As also noted previously, digital freedoms have also been eroded during Prime Minister Modi's tenure. In April, for example, the government enacted an amendment to the country's digital media rules, requiring intermediaries, including social media platforms, to remove content identified as fake or false, as defined by the government, by a government fact-check entity, effectively empowering the government to be the arbiter of truth on what content appears on the internet. CPJ has also documented a significant increase in online harassment against women journalists in recent years. For example, CPJ found that at least 20 female Muslim journalists who have all reported critically on how the central government's policies have threatened religious minorities were listed for sale, quote unquote, in a notorious auction app that was developed in January 2022 and published, putting those journalists at grave personal risk. More specifically, Washington Post columnist Rana Ayub has long been subjected to online trolling and threats, including those of rape and murder in relation to her reporting on what's happening in India. So the restrictions on press freedom, however, extend beyond the domestic media and Indian journalists. So Prime Minister Modi's government has tightened its grip on foreign media operating in India. As noted previously, the income tax authorities raided the BBC offices in Delhi and Mumbai following the government's censoring of the British broadcaster's critical documentary on PM Modi, re-examining his role in the Gujarat riots. Additionally, foreign correspondents have reported facing increasing visa uncertainties restricted access to several areas in the country, including Jammu and Kashmir, and even threatened with deportation in retaliation for their critical reporting about the situation in the country. In conclusion, the erosion of press freedom and the escalating threats to journalists in India during PM Modi's tenure kind of demonstrate the importance for the US government and President Biden to urgently raise the issues discussed today, including press freedom, while PM Modi is in town and visiting the President and the Congress. Thank you very much for this opportunity.